people can look at a trauma they've just been through and all the feelings around that and say, I think I'm experiencing the symptoms of trauma, maybe post-traumatic stress, maybe PTSD, maybe CPTSD. It's very helpful to put names to things, not because we like to label ourselves with negative things, but it's just helpful to put names to things. I remember when I first discovered that I was experiencing post-traumatic stress disorder, it was actually a relief because I couldn't understand what was going on with me. I was frightened of it. I had never experienced something as serious as that before. When I realized it was post-traumatic stress disorder, I felt a sense of, oh, that's what it is.
This is Empower Her, the podcast dedicated to empowering women with their health, wealth, and well-being. Get ready to feel inspired, informed, and empowered. If you haven't already, hit that follow button and please share with anyone who wants to feel empowered. Welcome to this episode of Empower Her. Today, we're going to be talking about trauma, past and present. How do we know if we have past or present trauma? Trauma can be a difficult and misunderstood word, and that's why I'll be discussing how to identify if you have been affected or are going through trauma right now, the effects of trauma, and what you can do about it with Michelle Simpson, who is an accomplished author, world traveller, and a beacon of hope for those navigating trauma, crisis, and grief. Michelle's book, Surviving Trauma, Crisis and Grief, has not only garnered international acclaim, but has also been endorsed by the esteemed US traumatologist and author, Dr. H. Norman Wright. Welcome to the Empower Her podcast, Michelle. I'm delighted to have you on. Please, could you share a little bit about your story from where you were to what you're doing now and your journey so far? That would be fantastic. Thank you so much.
Hi, Shreya. And it's just so lovely to be on your podcast. And thank you so much for inviting me. I'm really excited about it. Well, I came from a broken home. It's a sad place to start, but that's where I'll begin as we're looking at trauma today. So I come from a broken home with my mum having married 3 times, my dad having married 3 times. And I lost my mum to divorce when I was about 3 3/4. And my dad got custody of my brother and myself. And I was only allowed to see my mum initially once every month, and then for 1 day every 2 weeks. That's a big thing for a child to not have their mum. And I loved my mum a lot.
Yeah.
In my home where I grew up, I witnessed a lot of domestic violence. And just to qualify before I go on, none of this was actually towards me. It was just witnessed. And there was also sexual coercion and abuse. And just to qualify that again, it was not my parents. I just like to say that because, I don't want to leave them with they're not here anymore, but I don't want to leave them with a bad reputation. But it was not them, but there was sexual coercion and abuse from, I would say, probably started between the ages of 8 and 12. So those were the initial traumatic situations that I grew up with and took with me through my teenage years, which led to drinking, smoking, a lot of sexual relationships. And there have been traumatic events which have continued into adulthood as well. So, for example, someone very close to me had anorexia. So I had to nurse them through that, which is a very traumatic experience. And I can say, thankfully, they did actually come through that. But at the time, that was very difficult. And I also experienced the loss of a child through cult influence. And when I say loss, it's not death, but when you lose a child in that way and you are cut off by a child because of a cult or whatever other influence it is, it has a very dramatic effect psychologically. It's very traumatic. There are actually a lot of forums now set up specifically for parents who are experiencing that kind of thing. So those were my initial traumatic situations and my traumas in adulthood, there's been a lot of it. 30 years ago, I actually went into Christian work and started working overseas. And my experience with Christian work has been in 5 or 6 countries now, on 3 continents. And that has included animal-assisted therapy. I trained in animal-assisted therapy and did therapy with orphan children in Asia, worked with deaf children in China, worked with children of divorce in Canada. I've worked with Native Americans. So those 35 years now actually have been very much around helping people. So what I've done really is turn the trauma that I've experienced into something positive to help other people, which has been fantastic. So it's been hard, but it's been fantastic and very rewarding at the same time. Now I am starting my own podcast on well-being, and I'm also piloting TACT, which stands for Trauma Awareness Care and Training, which are workshops, which I'm actually starting in churches. The workshops are based on my book, which is called Surviving Trauma, Crisis and Grief: Practical and Spiritual Steps to Help You Survive, Heal and Help Others. And I'm starting the workshops on trauma training in churches, because in churches they're often working with people who are experiencing traumatic events, and yet the people who are working with them are often not trained in trauma. So the idea is to provide tools and support workers. And once that has been piloted, it'll be available to do with anybody who's interested in doing trauma training, trauma awareness training.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing that, Michelle. You know, I know with trauma, it is a difficult topic, and there are lots and lots of different types of trauma. Trauma, you know, during childhood, and again, that's different types of trauma. And you know, if you didn't experience trauma as a child, you may experience trauma as an adult. And again, there are lots of different types of trauma. So just going back to the trauma, I guess, what was the moment you realized that you went through the trauma, and what was that kind of moment where you changed your life around? How did that come about? Was it because someone mentored you or took, you know, gave you some advice, or was it your own realization and your own motivation and will to address the issues and get out of that situation?
I think if it had been left in some ways to my own motivation and will, I might have struggled a bit, because of the way trauma works with the brain is it actually changes the brain architecture. So when you're growing up as a child and you've had that brain architecture changed, and you don't even realize what's going on, of course, and often in adulthood we don't realize what is happening to us either. It can be very hard to change out of that situation yourself when you can't actually see it. So the thing that initially happened that helped me to recognize what was going on and to change it was actually my faith. I became a Christian when I was 20. That had a huge impact on me. And I started to realize through that everything that I had been through could actually be, I won't say for a reason. I don't like this idea that, oh, you've been put through that for a reason. You know, that's not very nice. But things just happen in life. You know, it can be an unkind world. Things just happen. But the idea that actually who I am and what I've been through is important. And if I can grow to understand it, I can turn that around and really start to help others. And it was my faith that really helped me do that. I think the second event was when my daughter, one of my daughters actually was under the influence of a cult. Initially, she didn't realize. And she was actually coerced away from us. And in this particular cult, it's in America and the UK. It's very dangerous. They're taught to divide families. They teach people to actually cut people off. They isolate people.
Mm.
And we had that situation happen with a very dearly beloved child. And we didn't know what was going on. And it was actually, frankly, it was terrifying. And I lost my daughter for 5 years. I didn't know where she was. I couldn't talk with her. I couldn't do anything.
Mm.
And it messes with you. That kind of situation psychologically messes with your mind. It leaves you in a state of fight or flight.
Yeah.
And I realized as this went on that I had entered into a mental and emotional state that was, in spite of all the trauma I'd experienced before, this was new. This was different. And so I had to start researching for my own survival, because I wanted to die. I didn't, but I did, if you know what I mean. I wouldn't have done anything, but life wasn't worth living.
Yeah.
And it was at that point I thought, I have to understand what's going on with me. And I started to research very thoroughly. And it was then that I realized I was experiencing post-traumatic stress disorder. So from there, I had to look at what to do about that. Speak to psychologists, speak to counselors, speak to a doctor. But not only that, do my own research. And that's so vital, is to learn yourself and empower yourself as a woman, as a person, to know what is happening with you, not just be told from the outside, but to really come to understand it yourself. And so it was during that time of having PTSD that I thought, once again, I need to change this around, because this is going to destroy me unless I take hold of it and do something with it, constructive with it. I don't want this to destroy me. So that was when I actually started writing the book, which with PTSD is theoretically pretty much impossible. But I was so determined that, having gone through the hell that I was experiencing, that if anyone else was, and there are many people, going through that hell of deep trauma and post-traumatic stress disorder, or post-traumatic stress before it enters the post-traumatic stress disorder stage, if I could do something that would help other people, that would be one of the most constructive, creative things I could do to bring out of this situation. So I started the book. Took me a long time, but I finished the book, and that's now on Amazon. And I just had another email from a lady, was it yesterday or the day before, who's just bought the book, and her daughter is going through serious trauma. And so her daughter can't read the book for herself, because often when you're traumatized, it's hard to read, to take things in. But she has bought the book for herself so that she can learn the tools and the steps to help her daughter. So I just had this email from her saying how much it's been helping. So that's been incredible. That situation turned around. I don't no longer have that situation of this child being involved, having this cult influence. That's all turned around, which is fantastic. But my story is one of, in the midst of that, I was able to create something to help other people. And doing it while I was right in the midst of it was so helpful, because when you come out of it to the other side, you don't remember it quite so well. When you're in the midst of it, you remember the feelings. You can explain very clearly what goes on emotionally, mentally, physically, spiritually, socially. Those are all the ways that trauma affects our lives. And I was able to explain all that incredibly clearly in the book. I've got lists of words under each of those headings. What's the spiritual, the physical effect, the mental effect, the emotional effect. And I encourage people, to get a pen and circle, what are you experiencing? What of the words here relates to you? So they can learn to understand what's going on with them. So yeah, it's very exciting. It's great to have some good communications from people saying how it's helping them.
That's great. That's really great to hear. With trauma, there are lots and lots of different types of trauma.
Yeah.
And like I said, you know, children, adults, and so on.
Yeah.
Can you roughly explain, you know, for people that some people don't even know that they've been traumatized.
No, they don't.
They just think it's part of life, and that's what life is.
Yeah.
And they don't actually sit down and think, you know what, that was quite traumatic and that has affected me. So can you kind of talk a little bit about that and how people can identify that actually that's trauma and I need to do something about that?
Yeah. So there's a quote by a lady called Diane Langberg, who is a counselor in America. She's been counseling for 40 years. And she says that trauma is a heart, mind, and soul wound from a very distressing, disturbing, or frightening event. So trauma upsets our feelings of security and safety. I don't know if you know him, Dr. Gabor Mate does a lot of work on trauma. Yeah. And he says trauma is what happens inside you as a result of a traumatic event, like a loss of connection to yourself and the present moment, because trauma really does that. It creates a fear of what's happened in the past, a fear of the future, and you end up in this place where you no longer feel connected to yourself or in the way that you were before. As I said, I do list in my book the different emotions and feelings that you can have around those different areas where it affects you mentally, emotionally, physically, socially, spiritually. And that's a very practical way of looking at it, which is why I give those lists in the book. When trauma affects your emotions, you may experience depression, anger, irritability. You may be very easily triggered, but not necessarily even by things around the original event. They could actually be unrelated, but for some reason they trigger you, so you become highly sensitized. You may experience a loss of confidence, a deep loss of confidence and anxiety. In the physical body, you may experience lethargy and fatigue, headaches, stomach aches. You may experience weight loss, weight gain, all kinds of unexplained illness that perhaps you didn't have before. Mentally, the big things mentally is that you become stuck in your thinking. It's hard to move on. You can start to develop thinking images around the event that you've seen, that you've witnessed, experienced yourself. You can have images which you can't get rid of, and they keep replaying in your mind. And sometimes they enter into your dreams in the form of nightmares. So there's a lot of very practical words that you can relate to say, am I experiencing trauma? So that's what I encourage people to do. My book is just one of the tools that you can use to do that, because I've got it all written down there for you in an easy format, so you don't have to do the work. And then trauma has a huge effect on the brain, as I said, on the brain architecture, because the brain is made up of billions of cells and neurons, which are all functioning across and along nerve pathways. And so the normal pathways neural pathways that your brain takes for your everyday functioning are actually changed. So life doesn't feel the same. You may not be functioning in the same way. What you were functioning in before, quite naturally and quite normally, may all of a sudden, it may just not work in the same way. You may not have the same attention span or the same ability to focus. I remember when I was experiencing deep trauma that I found it hard to read. I could just read a couple of sentences. I couldn't really take it in very much. That's why it's so extraordinary that I was able to write the book. I think there was a special grace there to be able to do that. So those are the kinds of things to look for. One of the things to understand is that if you have entered into a place of post-traumatic stress, you can experience all of those things that I've said. And that, after a period of about 3 months, can move into what is called post-traumatic stress disorder. That's going to be different for every person. It depends on your history. It depends on if you've already been through trauma in your life as a child or older. If you've already been through trauma, it can make your capacity to deal with adult trauma or trauma at any stage more difficult. Your capacity is lessened. So that's something that you can think about as well. You might have people say, what's your problem? It was only this that happened. I'm all right. I experienced the same thing and I'm fine. Or may not understand why you are so upset about what happened, especially if they experienced the same event. For example, it was a natural disaster, or they witnessed the same thing you witnessed. And they seem to be okay. And they may say, why do you have a problem? People could be very insensitive. And what they don't realize is that everybody functions differently. And something that traumatizes one person may not traumatize another. And that may be because there is a history of trauma already in that person's life. This can happen with soldiers on the battlefield. If they already have a history of trauma as a child, that can then, the traumas on the battlefield can then more readily turn into post-traumatic stress disorder. And also your personality enters into it. Some people are just more sensitive than others. Sometimes creativity, the gift of creativity, creates generally a more sensitive person. They're more sensitive to their environment, their surroundings, to perhaps the things people say or do. They may be more sensitive to all kinds of things, colors, light. These are generally more sensitive people. Trauma, they can be then differently affected by a trauma. So we have to be really aware of that personality and history. Nobody's the same. So this 3-month period of it moving from post-traumatic stress into what could be post-traumatic stress disorder is going to be different for everybody. And then you have to take into account something like complex post-traumatic stress disorder, which can happen if people have been in a situation of repeated trauma and they can't get away from it. And they've experienced multiple traumas as well. It can move into complex post-traumatic stress disorder. So people can look at a trauma they've just been through and all the feelings around that and say, I think I'm experiencing the symptoms of trauma, maybe post-traumatic stress, maybe PTSD, maybe CPTSD. It's very helpful to put names to things, not because we like to label ourselves with negative things, but it's just helpful to put names to things. I remember when I first discovered that I was experiencing post-traumatic stress disorder, it was actually a relief because I couldn't understand what was going on with me. I was frightened of it. I had never experienced something as serious as that before. When I realized it was post-traumatic stress disorder, I felt a sense of, oh, that's what it is. Now I know it. Now I've got it. It's tangible. I know what it looks like. I can learn about it, and then I can find out what to do with it, and I can also get help. So whatever kind of trauma it is, you can do that. Now, then and it all relates, but then we have something called sexualization, sexual trauma. I experienced this growing up, but unfortunately, sexualization is now being recognized as a real problem in the UK and in the USA. It's being recognized, which is good, but it's not being recognized nearly enough. And whether we're children or whether we're teens or whether we're young or older, sexualization is wrong and bad at any time. But early sexualization as a woman is what sets us up for a lot of these problems later on. It's a form of trauma. And there's a lot of research that has been done in the area of sexualization on how sexual abuse, sexual trauma in your earlier years, from childhood all the way into adolescence, can affect your health and well-being as an older woman. so Gemma Aitchison, she's the founder and director of Yes Matters UK, and they provide a free victim rehabilitation service for children who have experienced sexual abuse, sexual exploitation. She has a really interesting quote that I actually really like, and she says, "Sexual objectification of girls," and I'm going to extend that to women as well, because I think it's important no matter what age we are as women, "is an attitude of entitlement that comes from the subject being entitled to the object, the object adhering to product specification of the subject, which is heavily influenced by pornography." So you've got the subject, the object, the woman. The subject has a sense of entitlement.
Yeah.
That you should be this way and do this for me and let me do this to you. And the object, the woman, feels like she has to actually give in to product specification. She actually has to look a certain way, be a certain way, perform a certain way, sexually maybe, whatever it is. And a lot of that is influenced by pornography on the part which the subject is indulging. And there's something about that I like the imagery, the way she explains that. I think it's really helpful. So there are various excellent surveys that have been done. I actually did one myself. I did a survey of 100 women between the ages of, it was 150 women actually, between the ages of 25 and 70. The majority of them being between 40 and 60. And this was a cross section of women from many different countries, many different Asian countries, European countries, and North American countries. I won't go through them all. There's a lot, probably over 10 to 12 countries.
Yeah.
With the purpose of finding out what self-destructive beliefs these women had experienced, were still experiencing now as adults. So the name of the survey was "The Effects on Adult Women of Childhood or Under 18 Experience of Sexual Coercion." And interestingly, over a third of those women came back saying they had experienced sexualization as a child. Over a third. So if we can say over a third of women, and it's maybe even more than that, are experiencing sexual coercion as children, then we have to look at, well, how is that affecting them as adults now, and what can be done about that?
Yeah.
13% of those were aged between 1 to 5. 1 to 5. Little children, little girls. And then another 48% of them were between the ages of 6 and 10. 52% of them still had self-destructive beliefs as adults, which ranged from feeling dirty, guilty, feeling uncared for, abandoned, neglected, unloved, fat, that nothing good will happen, life isn't worth it. And this one I find very interesting, that they cannot achieve as much as they would like. So from the trauma that's happened all those years ago, they go into adulthood as women, struggle with self-destructive beliefs, feeling like they can't achieve as much as they would like. But as people, who we are and what we do in life is fundamental to our purpose for life. Yeah. So trauma is an attack on who you are, an attack on what you can do, an attack on your very contribution to people and to the world. It's an attack on your purpose in life. And that's what we have to fight back against, and be women who, in spite of the wrong things that have been done, in spite of the traumas that we have been through, are able to say, no, I am not going to let that destroy me. I am going to achieve the things that I would like to in life. Yeah. Or maybe because of the trauma, you can't achieve exactly what you would have liked, because maybe you're older, or, and that has an impact, or whatever it is. But to be able to then stand back and say, I may not be able to achieve exactly that, but What can I achieve?
Mm.
That is really, really key, especially as we get older and enter into menopause. Maybe we're going through a lot of life changes.
Yeah.
Really key.
Mm. Can I just ask you to kind of clarify what you mean by sexualization as a term? Because not many people are aware of that term specifically. People, they're aware of sexual abuse and sexual harassment. I know that probably forms part of sexualization, but what does the broader term sexualization mean?
Right. There was a quote I read just recently, and I don't have it on me, so I can't remember it exactly, and I can't remember who it was by, but somebody very key in this whole area. And they talked about, don't allow onto your screens or onto the screen of a child's phone, if the child should even have a phone. I mean, let's talk about that. Really, sexualization can happen very young over screens and phones. But they said, don't allow something into your child's life, a person into your child's life that you wouldn't invite into your own home for dinner.
Mm.
Then we have to think about sexualization in schools. Is it necessary that our, however old they are, child, very young child, is exposed to the kind of sexual education that is being introduced? Many people say no. It shouldn't be. That's not right. Children should be allowed to keep their innocence. They should be allowed to be children as long as they can be. I used to say to my girls when they were younger, childhood is very short. Of the whole of your life, childhood is actually going to end up being a really short part. So you need to be allowed to be a child and enjoy that, and enjoy the innocence of it, and enjoy the security of it, and enjoy the protection of it. A child's sexual development is an incredibly precious and fragile thing which needs to be handled with care. Children shouldn't have sexualized conversation, sexualized content thrust in front of them, especially without their parents' consent, from an early age.
Mm.
That should be up to responsible, loving, caring parents to decide on, not on schools to decide with young children, and especially saying that they're going to do that without parental consent. That's completely wrong. Let's look at schools. Well, when I was in school between the ages of 8 and 12, there were already boys of that age in my class and in another class in the same year who were touching girls up, who were wanting sex with them. And people joke about it. Oh, kissing behind the bike sheds. Oh, I don't think so. Kissing behind the bike sheds is not just some innocent pastime of young teenagers or something. We're talking about little girls and boys between the ages of 8 and 12 being told that to be popular, to be one of the crowd, to really know what's going on in the world and trendy, or whatever the word is these days, they should be having sex. I was told that between the ages of 8 and 12, and I was born a long time ago. I was born back in the late 60s. So if this was happening then, you can be sure with phones, the easier access to pornography, more lax rules around these things, and actually the introduction of more sexualized conversation and materials to our children, you can be sure that you're not only exposing them to sexual content, you are encouraging sexual behavior from a young age. That is wrong. It reduces actually takes away the necessary securities that a child should feel at that age. They shouldn't be dealing with that stuff. The only time a child really ends up dealing with that stuff in their own family is when it's happening in their own family, because there are people who are doing wrong or doing illegal things sexually. This is wrong. You shouldn't say, well, incest is wrong, or having sex with a child under 16 is wrong. You say that, but then you're allowed to actually promote it and encourage it in the form of content, material, lessons, or whatever you want to call it. And teachers in schools need to be aware of this stuff. Basically, if you're not aware of it and you're not protecting children from sexualization, you're not doing a good job. You're actually not protecting children. Not protecting children from sexualization is not protecting children. If you're not protecting children and their minds and their innocence, that's a form of abuse. Sexualization can come in an awful lot of forms. I mean, I've mentioned a few of them.
So, you know, we all know they teach sex education in schools, and you were talking about how you think that, you know, that's probably not the right way of going about it, and especially doing it without the permission of parents up to a point. How do you kind of then educate? There's this whole thing, you know, educating children about sex, and it's not just about this is what sex is and then you have a baby. It's not as simple as that. I know they teach, you know, the biology side of things in school as well, but how do you build awareness in children of, you know, this is right and this is wrong? And do you think that's the way they're going about it, or do you think they just shouldn't be talking about it in school at all, and they should just let children be? Because I don't know what the right way is either, to be honest. I just, you know, my kids have had sex education and I've let the school do it. And I don't really know what the impact is of it, to be honest.
No, and I think what you've just said there is really key, because things are being taught to our children. We don't always know exactly what they're being taught. We don't know the effect that it's having on them. They may not talk about it. We may not ask them about it. And we don't know the impact until the information they've been given has a chance to take some kind of effect. So there's a lot of questions parents and schools the government actually needs to be asking is how much influence should it be having on our children? Does it actually have the right to be imposing what it believes is correct about sex education on our children? I personally don't think so. I think in terms of biology, when children are learning biology at a certain age, of course it's normal to learn about that. But there's a whole other level where you get children putting condoms on models and all kinds of things. It's getting into a whole other level of teaching, which I don't believe the government has a right to impose at all. Parents, I'm talking not about abusive parents who do wrong things in bringing up their children. I'm not talking about that at all. I'm talking about responsible, loving parents who have a genuine interest in their children. I'm not talking about neglect, parents who neglect their children or couldn't care less. They should. Talk about intelligent, normal, loving, responsible parents are the best people to tell their children at the right time about sex, because they are the ones who know their children best. They are the ones who know their children's different personalities, their different sensitivities. They're the ones who can gauge situations best in the home as to when is a good time to introduce a topic, maybe through a book, or maybe a child's reading something, answer questions or whatever it is. They are the ones who should be doing that at the age where they feel they can do it in the right way. Schools don't have time to assess sensitivity. It's one mass lesson. We're going to teach you all this. We're going to teach you it now, whether it's appropriate or not. That's not right.
Yeah.
And I think in years to come, we will pay for the sexualization of children, whether it is done in what would be considered noble terms through education, or whether it's done in less pleasant ways in the playground, or by boys convincing girls that, or even girls convincing girls that the only way they can be popular, loved, trendy, and whatever it is by having intercourse, or by letting me touch you there.
Yeah.
They're both wrong.
Yeah.
It begins with parents,
Mm.
and they should decide. And there's a quote in Psychology Today that says, early sexualization can cause behavioral, developmental, and health-related issues, increased risk of depression, chronic attention to appearance, leaving fewer cognitive resources for other mental and physical activities. So basically, your development can be stunted because you interest children in sex too far, too young. And then with the coercive pressures of society, they feel they've got to engage in it. That is developmentally, it's going to stunt children developmentally, because it doesn't leave the energy and the resources left for healthy self-development.
Yeah.
Forget sex. You know, young people, they need a chance in their life. It's the only one they get to focus on what they're good at.
Yeah.
To focus on who they are, on being who they are, on being good at what they do, on finding out what their gifts are, and having a chance to build those and grow into people who can make a real contribution in their own lives and in the lives of others in really healthy, constructive, creative ways. There's plenty of time for sex.
Yeah.
Children need to be children for as long as possible. And the quote goes on to say, it increases shame, body shame, appearance anxiety, negative mental health outcomes in adolescent girls, anorexia, especially between the ages of 10 to 19 years, early onset of smoking, decreased sexual health. And it says there's a need to protect the emotional life and sensitivities of sexual development. And I think that's not what is being taken into account, because schools don't have time to take sensitivities into account.
Yeah. You know, there's so many things now, especially with social media. You know, I've got
oh, huge.
Yeah. You know, and that's something we can discuss definitely another time. But you know, I have children, and I know the increase in mental health and all these issues going on at the moment with, you know, what your body should look like, what your face should look like, and all sorts of things. Most of it is to do with social media. You know, before social media, we had TV, magazines.
That was enough.
Yeah, and that was absolutely enough. And you know, a 10-year-old or an 11-year-old couldn't really buy, well, you know, unless they had the money, a £2-3 magazine every week. You know, you'd actually have to buy it, or you stood there in the shop flicking through it. And that had its consequences as well, of the way women were portrayed, you know, that by the way they look, that what their, you know, body size was, that how big or small their lips were, the color of their skin, all sorts of things. And now it's just amplified on a level, and it's so stressful for parents and carers to see their child constantly looking at women and or men on social media portraying themselves with a certain body image that we, you know, this is what you should be looking like, you know, instead of just be you, accept your body. It's amazing, it's wonderful, and be who you are. But no, now it's the opposite message. And it's really worrying, and I just find the whole thing stressful, to be honest. It really is. And the stress levels for parents is amplified, parents and carers is amplified on a different level. It really is. It's not only were we worrying about all of that, and on top of that, you know, like you said, the sexualization, the sexual assault, the sexual abuse, the you know, all of that is happening at the same time.
Well, what's happening is children are being hijacked. Their minds and their hearts, or you could say their souls, because your soul is basically your mind, your will, your emotions. And all of those things are being hijacked and taken away. And that's not right. And this is where parents, there's got to be a healthy indignancy, a healthy indignant attitude at what is going on. There's got to be a healthy anger and a courage to stand up and say, no, you're not doing that. These are my children. They're not yours to do what you like with. We've got to be bold, got to get together with people, with other parents. I mean, I'm not a parent, I'm still a parent, but my kids are grown up now, but we've got to stand up and say no, get together and say no, and show some moral courage to protect our children. I mean, I can come at it from my own point of view, as I said, which is years ago. I know how much early sexualization affected my life. And stunted my development and stunted my education because it told me something else was important. And then I went into my teenage years and believed that really to be loved, it's a very deep, becomes a deep thing, not a conscious thing. To be loved, I need to be in a relationship. And to have a relationship, to maintain a relationship, I need to be having sex, because men won't maintain a relationship with you if you don't have sex. That's the message over and over again. And that was happening then. It's always been happening. But now with social media, even worse. And as I say, that's why people have got to have some moral courage and stand up to it. It's not right. It's not fair.
No, absolutely not. We know that the effects of social media and everything can also be quite traumatic for people as well, right?
Definitely.
And going back to the topic of trauma, as a child, it might be difficult to know that you're going through trauma, or you may know, but it's really difficult, especially if you're a very young child. Okay, it's a lot more difficult. But as a teenager or adult, what would you say is your kind of top advice for, one, figuring out whether you've got the trauma in the first place, or are traumatized, or have been traumatized? And secondly, once you've realized that you have been or are currently going through trauma, what's the next step to help that situation?
Well, firstly, I think recognizing is really important. Recognition is key. It takes a little bit of self-analysis, although I think it's easy enough for all of us to know when we're not functioning in the same way. We're experiencing some different feelings that we don't know how to control. We don't know what to do about it. It scares us a little bit. We don't recognize ourselves. And as I said, there's lists in my book which make it really easy for people to go through and just circle and say, oh, I am experiencing that. Oh, I am experiencing that. That can help you see whether it is actually, it could be trauma related. So recognition is vital to, and a bit of self-analysis, So if you are screaming at people, you're really easily irritated when you weren't before, or you can't focus on something like you could before, and you're thinking, oh my goodness, what's wrong with me? And you don't seem to get any better and you can't control it. That may well be because you've been through a trauma, especially if you can relate it to something that's just happened or happened before, which comes to your mind, or, then I would say there's a chance. So recognize, do some research. I think one of the problems too is that we, even with social media, we tend to leave things for a doctor to tell us. Now, it's good to see a doctor. That's really good. But do some research yourself as well around the area of trauma, around your symptoms, what you're experiencing. Don't become a hypochondriac and think, oh, I've got every disease in the world. Don't do that. Just do a little bit of sensible research around trauma symptoms, see what they are and see if it relates to you.
And then once you've figured that out,
if you have figured that out, well, also I would say go and see a doctor. If you are experiencing a lot of depression and unusual symptoms, go and see a doctor, and hopefully there will be one who is sensitive enough to consider that a trauma might be an idea. Doctors are not always the best people, because if you're depressed, they might prescribe medication for depression, which doesn't necessarily deal with the trauma. So you could go and see a counselor. But if you go and see a counselor, you need to be sure, if you think you're going through trauma, be sure that they are a counselor that has training in trauma. If they're a counselor that doesn't have training in trauma, it may not work very well. Counseling works for some people, so it can be really good. It's really helpful for talking about what you've been through and understanding more about what kind of trauma you're going through, or whether you've got PTSD or whatever. They may be able to help you with that if they're trauma trained. If they're not, they probably won't be able to, in which case they should refer you to somebody who is trauma trained. A doctor may put you on medication. It's best to work out if you're dealing with trauma first, not just go on medication. Medication can be really helpful. Antidepressants can be really helpful, but you still need to work out whether you're suffering from depression or anxiety, because those are can be different medications. So there's some little sensitive areas you need to work out there. And I'll be absolutely honest, medication doesn't work for everybody. Antidepressants can cause some people other problems and not work. Counseling is really good. If that works for you, that's great. The issue around counseling is that you may not be able to afford it if it's private. You may not be able to get it if it's on the NHS, because, for example, in Wales, the waiting list is 2 years. And when you're dealing with trauma, you need help right now, not in 2 years' time.
Yeah.
If it's private, you may not be able to pay for it because it can get expensive to have it every week. I mean, you could be looking at 40, 50, 60 pounds. Sometimes it's on a sliding scale, which is helpful, but even so, you may not be able to afford it. If you do get counseling, you also have to remember, if you have it once a week, once every other week, what are you going to do in between? Now, you can put into practice the things the counselor has tried to help you with, but you can know so much more. The more understanding you have of what you're dealing with, the more knowledge you have to empower yourself. Is excellent. Do that. Empower yourself. Learn about it. Learn about what to do with it yourself, because you've got days in between when you're not seeing a counselor. What are you going to do with those days? How can you help yourself? That is really, really key. And if you can help yourself, it also means that you may be able to help others understand what you're going through. You could say to your husband, well, actually, I'm going through trauma. I've learned this about it. This is why I'm bad-tempered. This is why I can't handle it when you say this. You can create some conversations around it and bring understanding, not just to yourself, but to those in your world. That's really, really important, because then you're more likely to be able to get the support of those closest to you. I think normalizing is really important. Understand that when you're going through trauma and you're experiencing all these unusual symptoms, you can feel like you're really weird, that you've really lost it. It's very discouraging. That's very disempowering and difficult for your confidence, a real blow for your confidence. But what you have to recognize is everything that you're going through is normal. If you've been traumatized, all the feelings that you have are absolutely perfectly normal. So again, you can breathe a sigh of relief. You're not weird, you're not odd, you're just normal. And you've been through a horrible event, and that's what horrible events can do. In terms of actual healing, there are alternative therapies. Sometimes people adopt alternative therapies. I never had any of those. Other people have their own ideas of what might be helpful, which they could try. Anything that brings about relaxation, brings them to a place of being able to focus on the now, helps their mind be in a better place, as long as it's a better place. Then it's a good therapy. In terms of the practicalities, some of the practicalities that I have in the book, I'd love to mention them all to you because they're all so helpful. So what am I going to say? Okay, I'd start off with a really, really basic one. Good nutrition. It seems so, what? I'm going through trauma and you're talking to me about what I eat. I feel like eating chocolates and just drinking myself to death, you're worth more than that. You're worth so much more than that. And all you're going to do by doing that is make yourself feel worse. We talked about brain architecture. The fact that it's a wound to the brain, basically, is what it is. You need to feed yourself well. You need all the good nutrition that you can get. So you need to say no to toxic substances, alcohol, cigarettes, drugs, these kinds of things. No, none of that will help long term, not at all.
Yeah.
And say no. Try to learn new habits around your own physical health. Start saying no to too much refined food and refined sugars, because they're not adding anything. When you think about it, if food is the substance of life, it feeds your brain. So food, what you get from food, feeds every cell of your body. It goes into your bloodstream, feeds every cell of your body, and feeds your brain. So what you put in terms of nutrition makes a huge difference to how your brain heals.
Yeah.
So I would cut out the sugars, the refined sugars, try to eat more whole grains, more of a plant-based diet if you can. So more vegetables, more fruit and nuts, grains, seeds, and give your body more immunity and more space and energy to heal. So that's the big one. And natural high quality supplements are a good idea. So for women, you're looking at having a good multivitamin mineral, B complex for mood balance, vitamin C, calcium and magnesium are really important. And that one natural supplement that can be really helpful is rhodiola. As long as it has 3% rosavins in it, that can be helpful for energy and mood. Watch out for selenium. Anything that is a serotonin boost is really good, but don't take extra if you are on antidepressants, because you can get too much serotonin, and that can actually be toxic. Right. So be careful with that. Another thing they're trying now is called BCM95. This is the concentrated form of curcumin, or curcumin, people say it differently, from turmeric. They've concentrated it into a really powerful form, which you just take as capsules. And they're actually running trials now, or have run trials, and found that it's really useful for depression. It's an anti-inflammatory. Yeah. So it's really going to help your brain, your body, and help with depression. I used that for a long time, still use it on and off. And yeah, so that's really worth, a little bit on the pricey side, but it's one of those things that it's really worth doing, because it's you're important, and your health is important. So yeah, good nutrition. There's so much I want to say here. Exercise, just get some exercise, try and move your body, do an activity that you love, whether it's swimming, walking, power walking, even if it's just stretching, putting some music on and dancing around the room. Anything that just stimulates all those healthy functions in the body, gets you going, stimulates the brain, stimulates the mind, and is a positive, healthy experience. You just feel so much better, and it's such a stress relief. And that's what you need. Trauma is a massive stress on the body. You need stress relief. Get more sleep. And don't drink lots of coffee. Too much coffee is never going to help you sleep at night. Don't drink coffee or caffeinated substances too close to bedtime. And don't use screens too close to bedtime, because the blue light is renowned for not helping people get to sleep. Don't eat too late, unless you're going to have a snack of some kind of tryptophan containing food, which can help you sleep. So you're looking at maybe raw almonds, something whole grain, milk and honey is really good. You can use essential oils. There's nothing like a bit of lavender on your neck, on your pillow, to help relieve stress, help you sleep. Diffuse some essential oils into the room, chamomile, lavender. Make sure you take calcium and magnesium, especially at bedtime. That helps you sleep. And listen to soothing music and anything that distracts you from your mind going into thinking about the trauma at bedtime. So those are three really practical. I've got some amazing things here, such as creativity, visualization, positive words, validation. These are all so helpful, but I haven't got time to tell you about all of them.
No, that's fine. That's fine. I mean, just to sum it up, really, it's any symptoms that you might feel, whether that's low mood, being snappy, angry, feeling low, sad. Look, I mean, there's so many different
it's huge,
moods and things. Okay, acknowledge that and do some research and find out whether is a result of something that's happened in the past or that's happened now. And something that happened in the past or now, it doesn't have to be something major to be traumatic, like, you know, sexual abuse or
No.
you know, rape or lots of these things that, you know, that's severe trauma. It could be a mild form of trauma that happened in your childhood.
It could be. Yeah.
You know, it, you know, what's mild to some might be amplified for others.
Exactly.
Right? You know, we can't even say it in that way. I don't want to say it in that way either, to be honest, because what's mild for me might be really amplified for someone else.
Yep.
And vice versa.
Yeah.
So however that's affected you, you know, find that out from based on your moods and stuff. And then once you do, seek the help you need through the doctor, through counseling. If you don't have the money for counseling, do your research. You know, Google is free. But like you said, let's not have every single disease under the sun that, you know, we diagnosed ourselves with.
Don't become a hypochondriac.
Yeah, exactly. Don't become a hypochondriac, and then seek the help. And there are plenty of things you can do for yourself. Empower yourself to do things for yourself.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
You've just given a whole long list of things you can do for yourself, you know, with regards to your mental and physical health.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, that's great. And I'm sure, you know, your book has lots of information on trauma, and
I've got a lot of tools in there.
Exactly.
A lot of tools that people can use. And the nice thing about it is you can choose what works for you. You can try different things, find out what works. You can do a variety of things.
Yeah.
And I will say that if you are a woman entering into menopause and you're being affected by trauma, that is a really tough place.
Yeah.
So that's what happened to me. It was huge. So in that situation, you need to, and research has shown that trauma does impact menopause. So if you are in menopause and experiencing the effects of trauma, please do some research on that. And there's actually plenty there to look at. To find out that there is an effect, a relationship between trauma and menopause. But then, and I do mention it in my book as well, Menopause and Trauma, self-care is so important. And it's a time in life where maybe it's good to stand back. And the big question I had to ask was just 2 words. I've been through menopause. I'm in trauma. What now? Or I'm in, you know, I was still going through it then. What now? What now? Because it gives hope. Maybe this is a time for me to stand back and say, how can I change my life? How can I make adjustments that are healthier for me? Maybe you've spent a lot of your life bringing up children, helping others or whatever, but what now?
Yeah.
What do you need now?
Is that past and present trauma can affect menopause, or just present trauma?
Interestingly, childhood trauma affects menopause.
Right.
And that is the strange thing about it, such a distance between childhood and menopause. And yet it's all about the change in brain architecture.
Right.
So childhood trauma can affect menopause symptoms and make them more severe. So what they're saying now is that if a woman presents with severe menopause symptoms, actually there needs to be screening to see whether that woman has gone through trauma. And that could be trauma in childhood. But when you think about it, if you go through any trauma that changes brain architecture at any point, it could still have an impact. But the research they have done specifically has been with childhood adverse childhood events and menopause. But obviously, anytime if it's serious. Well, you're saying, you know, it may not be something really, really serious, but again, you see, you're right. What is serious to you isn't serious to somebody else.
Exactly.
So and that's how serious it is to you.
Yeah, I think that's key, really.
It really is.
Someone else's serious might not be serious for you, and vice versa.
Exactly.
And I think we have to really be mindful of that, and
we do.
And
really,
you know, and not judge people because they're you think they're overreacting on something. That there's a reason for everything. And it is what it is. You know, we've been through so many topics and talked through so much stuff. I feel like there is part 2 coming, because I would really
opened it out.
Yeah, and I would really love to hone in on specific things with you, Michelle, because we've talked through trauma, sexualization, trauma and health, trauma and menopause, and that's so many things. We've talked on a high level, and I feel like number 3 maybe
be so good. It would be lovely to look at some of these other things that you can actually do. So exciting.
Yeah. So I will leave it there. Michelle, thank you so much for being on the Empower Her podcast. It's been fantastic to have you on.
Thank you, Shreya, so much. I've loved it.
Thank you. Thanks for tuning in to Empower Her. I hope today's episode has left you feeling inspired and motivated to make a positive difference in your world. Please follow the podcast and share it with anyone who will find it helpful. Until next time, keep striving for positive change and greatness for all women.